Hey everybody, it's time to talk about more cheap heat, talk about more really great records that you don't have to pay an arm and a leg for. And generally, I think almost all these records can be found online or in your local record shop, especially if you live in a large city, for less than $20 a piece, and in some cases considerably less than that. I'm trying to concentrate on stuff that I think absolutely is wonderful. I feel like maybe I've strayed too far, trying to cast too wide of a net and talked about a lot of stuff that's really good, but it's sort of like honorable mention type stuff. There you go. But maybe not, I don't know. I just feel like looking back at some of the stuff I've done, I've gone back and it's like, some of these records are good, but they're not great. And I really want to, there's so much great music out there. There's even more good music out there, but there's so much great music out there. And of course, my taste isn't your taste, but I'm gonna take that risk. And I hope that, if you do find these records for a few bucks, that they bring you as much joy as they brought me. What we're listening to right now is a record that I've always loved, and it's always baffled me. As good as this record is, listen to this, with the Rhodes and little percussion. And it's beautiful. That's what people are, I think, looking for these days. This sparse beauty and analog sounds. I gotta crack up. This record could be had for next to nothing. And it's on a small label. It might even be a private press. I don't know of too many other records on this label. I don't think, maybe the guy put it on himself. I don't know. Anyway, without any further ado, Terry Plumeri, He Who Lives in Many Places, is the name of this record. And if you think you're hearing some all-stars on this record, if you can read that fine print, Herbie Hancock on Fender Rhodes, John Abercrombie on guitar, Michael Smith, a very fine DC area drummer, and Plumeri on bass and compositions, Eric Gravatt on percussion, mostly on this. He doesn't play the kit. I got it because I was a huge Eric Gravatt fan, still am. But he kind of plays a percussive role rather than a playing the kit role. Anyway, this is a great record. You're going to hear the rest of the first side, and you'll see how wonderful the whole thing is. The whole thing, it's outstanding. And I've seen this record literally for $5 recently, not like in 1977 or whatever. Anyway, Plumeri unfortunately passed away. I think it was in a car wreck, and he was only in his 50s, had a lot of lead left in his pencil, and it's really a tragedy that he's no longer with us. He transitioned from making sort of spooky jazz records into making film soundtracks, and was very successful and taught courses on it. This guy is a for real talent. And the one thing he does here that sets him apart, he does the bowed bass with the wah-wah pedal like Miroslav Vitus did. He kind of has mastered that technique as well and uses it as a lead instrument on this record quite a bit. Anyway, this is such a tremendous record, and really, well, you'll hear it. He did a follow-up that initially I wasn't so crazy about because there's no Rhodes on it and not much electric guitar, some electric guitar, not much. It's called Ongoing, and it's a fantastic kind of spooky, soundtracky sort of record. There's one track on here, it's called Bornless One, and it sends chills up and down my spine every time I hear it. It is superb and very imaginative and could have been made yesterday. Super fresh stuff. This one's all acoustic, no Rhodes. The piano player on this is Mark Cohen, the guy out of Friends. John Abercrombie's on this as well, also in Friends. Remember I talked about that record a couple of videos ago. But they're both in acoustic mode. Of course, you all know that Mark Cohen changed his last name to Mark Copeland and is now possibly one of the top 10 jazz pianists in the world today. Here he's flashing some heavy-duty stuff. Other people on this record include Ralph Towner on acoustic guitar. Michael Smith makes some appearances on drums as well, and a bunch of other people. There's some expanded string quartet type stuff on this as well. This is a fantastic record, and don't let the fact that it's all acoustic deter you from picking up a cheap copy. Ongoing by Terry Plumeri. Getting back into the jazz rock thing, which is my main thing. This is a record that made a huge impression on me as a teenager. It's by a French band called Sphero, and it's kind of an all-star band. You may not have heard of everybody because most of these guys are sort of behind-the-scenes all-stars. The drummer is a guy named Patrice Gurel, and he is best known for his work with the Chico Magnetic Band, which if you're a hip-hop guy or a crate digger, serious record collector, you know who I'm talking about. Chico Magnetic Band was like a Hendrix knockoff band in the late 60s in France, and I think they did one record produced by Jean-Pierre or Jean-Paul Massera, who's a crazy, crazy producer who produced a number of very odd and sometimes difficult records. Anyway, that tie-in is here. Gurel is the drummer and did 2 tracks on here, composed 2 tracks. The main composer on here is the keyboard player, Gerard Maimon. Fantastic compositions, great playing. I would say they don't sound just like Return to Forever, but it's kind of similar to Return to Forever. With Bill Connors instead of Al Di Meola, because the guitar player Michel Perez definitely has sort of a Hendrix, McLaughlin sort of wild man thing going on. I'll get to him in a little bit. The bass player Rito Bayonne, real funky, just a fantastic record full of great melodies, great themes, great compositions, long compositions, stretched out multi-part fusion, jazz rock, Nirvana. Love this record. The French pressing of this is with the same ugly cover art, is also inexpensive. This is real inexpensive though. This one's on Inner City. And if you ever see this and you like fusion, pick it up. Can't go wrong with that one. Sphero had a second record called Belladonna. Whoops, wrong side. Belladonna. And French only, never came out in the US. It's very similar to their other records. Same guys, same exact guys. The difference being this is more of a funk jazz rock record, and the tracks are really short. Not super short, but like 3 to 4 minutes for the most part. And there's some jamming for sure, but this is no less great actually. But it's just a slightly different kettle of soup, as they say. More of a funk sound, but awesome, super awesome. I mentioned Michel Perez, the guitar player in Sphero, and this is sort of out of the mainstream of the records I'm talking about. It's not really a jazz rock record, and it's from the early 80s, but still it's worth mentioning. Michel Perez was in Sphero, and this was his solo record. I think he might have done a few more. This is really good. It's got Rhodes on one track. The rest is acoustic piano. It's really good, all original, challenging jazz. It's not really a jazz fusion or jazz rock record. It's not really straight ahead either. And there's some really interesting players on this. The bass player, Marc Berteau, you might know if you are into Zool at all. He was, I think, briefly in Magma and played with some of the Magma guys in different configurations. The keyboard player is Luc Pluton, who, again, if you follow that whole French fusion Zool kind of world, Luc Pluton was the keyboard player in Didier Lockwood's Surya, which is one of the all-time great fusion records of any period of any time. And he played these brilliant single line Moog solos that sort of sounded like Jan Hammer on a particularly excited state. No Moog on this, unfortunately, but Rhodes on one track, and his piano playing is great. Anyway, this is a cool record and can be had for not very much money at all. And it'll be cheaper for those of you who are in Europe who don't have to pay postage. There are, in the 70s, there's a lot of really good fusion, and some of these bands recorded a bunch of records, and only 1 or 2 of them was available in the US. And of course, the US pressing is going to be super cheap. The Euro pressing is going to be slightly more, but they're still can be really cheap. And sort of the exemplar of that is this band from England called Isotope. And they're kind of a little less obscure than most of the stuff I talk about. That's because the guitar player was Gary Boyle, who was in Brian Auger and Trinity for a while. He was also in Stoma Yamashita's group. And he's a fantastic McLaughlin-influenced guitar player. Very unique sound. And actually a really nice guy. I got to meet him once. The bass player on this is Hugh Hopper out of Soft Machine. There he is. And keyboard player on this one is Lawrence Scott. He was later replaced by Brian Miller, who was in a band called Turning Point, who I could also talk about in these videos. And the drummer is Nigel Morris, really well-known British jazz player and a fantastic technician. Anyway, this is a great fusion record, and it came out on the Gull label in the US. It was also on the Gull label in the UK. And I think Gull was distributed by Motown. And so a lot of these got cut out and can be had for next to nothing. And again, it's a fabulous, red hot fusion record. Really cool. Really like a jazz rock record. Isotope did a few more records that were UK only. As this was their first one that never came out in the US, but came out in the UK. Illusion was their second one. This was their first one. This is even more Mahavishnu-y than Illusion. And this has Jeff Klein on bass. Really well-known British bass player. Nigel Morris. Oh, and this has Brian Miller on it. So Lawrence Scott replaced Brian Miller. Sorry about that. So anyway, this is really good. This is a little bit more directly related to Mahavishnu than Illusion. Illusion has, with Hugh Hopper on, has sort of a soft, later period Soft Machine vibe to it. Their final record, Deep End, really kind of gets more ambitious and a little bit more polished too, no less great. And again, not that expensive for a really fantastic fusion jazz rock record. I love this record. And again, Gary Boyle, Nigel Morris, two keyboard players, so lots of percolating Rhodes on this. Zoe Kronberger, who appeared on Gary Boyle's solo records, we'll get to that in a minute, and Frank Roberts, who was in Passport and Jabula on electric piano as well. The bassist was Dan K. Brown, who is really, to me, best known as the bass player in Stinky Winkles, which is a fantastic kind of out there band that did one record on a Polish jazz record label, Musa, and disappeared. But that was a really cool record. Tough one to find though. Anyway, Deep End with the two keyboard players, a little bit more arranged, no less great though. Really, just these are great jazz rock records. Gary Boyle recorded a string of really good solo records, which all can be had fairly cheaply. The first one, though, is absolutely killing. One of the most beautiful versions of Maiden Voyage you'll ever hear is on this record. Gary Boyle, Zoe Kronberger from the last edition of Isotope. Simon Phillips is on some of this. It's just a really great jazz rock record. It's even more, I guess, lush and arranged than the last Isotope record, but it's not smooth by any stretch. It's a really happening jazz rock, funky fusion record that, again, can be had for next to nothing. This is one I listened to quite a bit in college, and can't recommend it highly enough. So Isotope, Gary Boyle, good stuff. Seek those out, and they won't cost you much. Another guy whose records some of them go for a lot of money and some of them don't, and it seems almost random to me, is this Japanese guitar player, Rio Kawasaki. And this is on the MPS label, a German label. It also was pressed in the Netherlands. And I believe the Netherlands pressing is slightly less expensive. But again, you're talking less than 10 euros for this one, or $15 tops. I've seen this for a lot less though. And again, for pure fusion jazz rock excitement, this is probably one of Mr. Kawasaki's better records. It's really a cool record. It's got Dave Liebman on soprano sax and tenor sax, Buddy Williams on drums, who's a very well-known New York session guy, and he really shows his fusion chops here. Alex Blake on bass. So no keys on this. So it's saxophone, guitar, bass, and drums quartet. But it's a very cool record, very energetic. Not as much of a jazz funk record as the stuff he did in Japan, for example, several of which were reissued in the U.S. Those are good records too, but they're strictly, to me, on the honorable mention list. This one stands out though. So if you see this one on NPS, either the Dutch pressing, I believe that's what this is, the black label, grab it because it's such a good record. Now, I stirred up a little bit of controversy online. I'm in a one of these Facebook groups that talks about music, and it just goes to show you got to be careful what you say and do when you're online. I raved about this record, and then I got sort of a lot of withering comments about it. And who knows? For me, this record kills. It absolutely kills, and it is a private press, and it is so Mahavishnu influenced, it's almost ridiculous. But this guy is so good. Darryl Dobson, and the name of the record is The Mind Electric, and it came out in 1980. And the knock on this from some folks is that it has that 80s sound, but to me the 80s sound is like DX7 and a lot of compression, and this doesn't have either of those things, so I'm not quite sure what they meant by that. Anyway, this is, if you like jazz rock fusion that's like high energy and has sort of an exotic element to it, I'll get to that in a minute. Get this record. It is so good, and the personnel on it is unreal. Kenwood Denard on drums, on some tracks. Delmar Brown on keyboards on some tracks. Fernando Saunders plays bass on some tracks. El Shankar is on one track. Tony Smith, another great drummer, is on several tracks. Kenny Kirkland's on one track. I mean, you get the idea. It just goes on and on and on, personnel-wise. And Dobson is just an incredible guitar player, firmly in the McLaughlin, Santana, Pete Cozy tradition of just over-the-top guitar madness. And I highly recommend this. There's a track on YouTube that you can check out if you doubt me. Maybe it won't give you a full idea of how really great this record is. And I compared it to the Zobel record that I think that got me some Razzies, because that Zobel record is literally worshipped in my circles. This isn't the same. I mean, the Zobel record was, except for the electric bass, all acoustic, and compositionally a little bit denser than this. But to me, in terms of just the frenetic passion of the playing and just the fact that it's essentially a one and done record, I don't know. To me, that's a parallel enough. Now, Dobson is still around. He's still in South Florida playing. He makes occasional appearances. He's still really, really great. He just, he must have just sort of dropped off the map, or he had a life, he had kids, or whatever. I don't know. But he's still around, still making great music. But this record was like mind-bogglingly good, and it could be had for next to nothing. And you should get it if you like jazz rock fusion. Got a few more to talk about. Michael Urbaniak's done a lot of really great music over the years, and his records are a real kind of crapshoot. I like almost all of them, frankly. And this one really stands out. Like the Rio Kawasaki, it's on the MPS label, pressed in both the Netherlands and in Germany, I believe. And both pressings are really cheap. And this band only appeared on this one record. It's Michael Urbaniak on Lyricon and violin, Ursula Dudziak on vocals and madness, good madness. And then the backing band on this is just mind-bogglingly great. Transcending Sunship, aka Woody Theus, on drums. He is amazing. Harold Ivory Williams on keyboards was with Miles Davis. Tony Bunn on bass. A great session bass player based in Baltimore, DC. It's just a fantastic record. Really, really a standout in Urbaniak's catalog. And if you see this and you like Urbaniac even a little. You might want to check this out. They really get out of the bag on this one. They really do some crazy stuff. I think it's his freshest work since his Polish only releases, which like Paratyphus B and Inactin and the live ones that he recorded for Musa back in the early 70s. It never came out in the US. Those are all great. And this, to me, Smiles Ahead, revisits that sort of frenetic madness that the early 70s fusion really seemed to bring. I'm going to wrap this up. I got two more to talk about. I mentioned Rio Kawasaki, a great Japanese guitarist. Another great Japanese guitarist, even more prolific than Rio Kawasaki, is Kazumi Watanabe. And he's done a bunch of really cool records, most of which are not that expensive. And he did a series of records that came out in the US in the 80s on the Gramavision record label. And I have two of them. I wouldn't mind having all of them, but these are the two of the best anyway. Mobo 2 and then Mobo Splash. And these are more sort of an 80s, these are to me an 80s sound. And this one gets pretty wacky. It's got Dr. Umezu on saxophones. It's got David Sanborn on saxophone. If you don't like David Sanborn, he is prominently featured on one track that sounds a little bit almost like kind of like amped up smooth jazz kind of a thing. But that's just one track. The rest of this record is cooking. It's really cool. This is a little bit more understated, but it's a really good fusion record. Definitely deserving of your attention if you like sort of groovy, funky, sort of dark, mysterious sounding jazz rock. This has got Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare on a lot of it. And it's just got that sort of, it's not a reggae record though, but it's got that sort of trance-like groove thing happening. So these are just some records that you can find and purchase for sometimes less than $10 or 10 euros, depending on where you're based. And I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. I'll put the list of records I talked about in the comments section below this video, and I hope you have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.